Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. I recently attended the International DX Convention in Visalia, California. It was a great experience. It was the first time I had the opportunity to meet many of my guests in person. One of the people I met during that trip was Bob Wilson, N6TV. I knew of Bob, and I'd actually bought some of his gear that he does in his retirement job for my remote station in northern Maine. And after talking to Bob in Visalia, I realized yet another person that I could benefit from having a longer conversation, and maybe you would get something from that too. So I asked Bob to join us from California. He's with me today. Hi, Bob.
Hello.
So let's just start with Visalia. It was a really great experience. I understand that the attendance was down year over year, but for a newcomer, I didn't notice. I just noticed that there were a lot of amateur radio operators that I had either interviewed or knew of, and I've got to tell you, the conversations in the hallways, I think, were the best part of the entire 2 or 3 days I was there. But tell me about your intersection with Visalia and your involvement.
My very first Visalia, which was held in nearby Fresno at the time, was in 1975. I just graduated from high school. I was about to go off to college that fall. N6TR now, used to be WB6ZBC then. He drove me up, I believe, to the hotel. I didn't have a driver's license yet, I think. And he introduced me to all these guys from the north that I'd never met before, but I'd worked in contests a lot. And it was just a huge fun time for me to be, this teenager being kind of hanging out at a hotel with all these adults. And there was a lot of crazy talk and a lot of fun. And I remember going to a contest forum and having many people in the audience raising questions, and I thought it was a real fun time, and I enjoyed it tremendously. And of course, they were very kind to me. I remember Glenn Ratman, K6NA, who was W6MAR at the time, one of the contest gods in Southern California, greeted me with a warm smile and said, "There's the guy who works me on every band," and he kind of knew who I was, and I thought that was, really cool, and it gave me a very positive outlook about contesting, that I could actually be recognized for something. And Rick Niswander, I forget his call at the time, he was the editor of the contest column in QST. And I remember him walking into the elevator and pointing at me and saying, "Your picture is going to be in QST," or because I had sent in the picture with the sweepstakes results. And sure enough, it appeared in the May 1975 issue of QST, and I could show it to my parents, and that was just an amazing thing, and that hooked me on contesting, I guess.
Bob, since I know that a lot of people watch this show that are relatively new to ham radio, or maybe haven't been in as long as you have, don't necessarily understand what you know about Visalia. So explain a little bit about the genesis of that, and I believe that the Northern Club swaps with the Southern Club year over year, and each one takes responsibility. But tell me more about that.
It goes way back, way before my time, to the 50s, I think, or just after the war. The Northern California DX Club and the Southern California DX Club decided to meet in the middle of the state, which is around Fresno or Visalia, to have a convention once a year, mainly a DX convention, where people could brag about what their country counts were and so on. And contesters were kind of added later. We were more of an afterthought. We kind of took over the convention at some point. But it's still mostly a DX convention, and it's built that way. And of course, during COVID times, they weren't able to hold it. But it is sort of a unique opportunity for the typical Northern, Southern California rivals to get together and have a drink and talk over the DX and what's on, and hear presentations. And actually, DX people would come from all over the world. Marty Lano, H2BH, who would attend. You would get to meet famous DX expeditioners, giving slideshows, showing you, here we are getting on the plane, here we are getting off the plane, here's our luggage, here we are setting up antennas. They're all kind of the same, but everyone gives you a unique perspective. You get to see the places you've talked to on the radio. So it was always appealing to have DX expeditioners present. And then it grew from that to have Contest Forum and ARRL Forum and other events as part of the formal presentations. And then later they added Contest Academy, kind of mimicking what K3LR did with Contest University on a smaller scale. And I think there's a DX Academy now also, where DXing techniques can be taught and shared. So it's educational as well as just fun hallway talk.
So I think we all saw a decrease in public gatherings during COVID, obviously. First of all, there weren't any at all. Then when some of these public gatherings started up again, There was decreased attendance. Make your best sales pitch as to why people should go to Visalia. What's in it for them?
Well, there's QSL card checking. No, there's a lot of reasons that people could go. It's mainly to meet the people on a face-to-face basis, not over Zoom, not like this, but shake hands with somebody and have a good talk in the hall, share a drink, share a meal, go out to any of the fine restaurants. Visalia is a very nice downtown, easy walk from the convention center to a lot of very nice restaurants. Pretty safe town. I wouldn't say the same for Fresno. So I'm kind of glad they moved it from Fresno to Visalia. It's just an opportunity to get away from it all and see a lot of equipment. Well, there were less this year, but in prior years, there were a lot of vendors showing. Yaesu was there in the old days, and ICOM and Kenwood, and HRO had a booth in the old days, and you could buy stuff there and get a show discount and just have a good time doing nothing but talking about radio for the whole weekend.
So speaking of vendors and the manufacturers, you're right, there weren't too many in that hall. Do you think that's a trend where less manufacturers are coming, or do you think that's just, again, a holdover from the COVID years and we're building back?
I can't answer it for other companies as to why the ones that often are there didn't show up, except, obviously it's a big expense for a company to show up at these shows and it's they have to pay for the people to be there. It's a lot of work for the people to set up the booth, tear down the booth, and lug all that equipment around, maybe travel from overseas or across the country. And Dayton is the big show for that stuff. And that's where people probably, would go, where vendors would probably want to go to get the most exposure to the most people. So part of it may have to do with, recruiting vendors, inviting them to come. I'm not involved with the running of the shows. You could interview someone like John, K6MM, who's run several Visalias very successfully from the Northern California group, and can tell you what he did to make sure there were lots of vendors. You want the biggest crowd size if you're going to be a vendor. You want to meet the most people, make the most sales, make the most potential sales, get good feedback from customers. So it's easier for folks like LCraft. They're based in California. It's not a hard drive for them to get down there. They'll be at Dayton too, which obviously is going to be much more expensive for them to be, but they get, I'm sure, a lot more business at Dayton, especially if they announce new gear.
Well, I was going to mention LCraft, though. They had a very substantial booth presence. They had a lot of equipment. And I noticed every time I went to talk to Eric, he was involved in the conversation. So he was certainly interacting with clients and prospective clients. So I got to believe it was pretty worthwhile. And when I looked at that, I just could only imagine that some of these other manufacturers missed out on an opportunity because, sure, it wasn't a huge crowd, 500 people, maybe 600 people, but the people that were there seemed to be very engaged. I noticed the same thing at Flex. They seemed to be busy with interactions the entire time I was there.
Well, that's one of the benefits of going to the convention that I should have mentioned is you get to meet the manufacturers or their representatives directly. It's a lot easier than emailing them and waiting for a response. You get to have an interactive conversation. And I remember one Visalia many years ago, I went to the ICOM booth. They had a new radio out. And I said, well, you press the RIT clear button and you have to hold it down for a whole second before it clears the RIT. And it's still, I think, the default behavior of ICOM. And I gave that feedback to ICOM, and sure enough, a year or so later, they had finally added a menu item that lets you tap RIT clear and have it clear instantly, which is what all contesters wanted to do before we had software to control our radios and do it for us. So, that kind of feedback is invaluable, and it's good when vendors listen. LCraft's one of the best vendors for listening. Also, LCraft doesn't sell through other dealers like ICOM and Kenwood and Yaesu do. So they can do direct sales there at the convention, offer a show discount. Companies like ICOM and Kenwood and Yaesu, they can't really do that. They have distributors, and so they have a different model, and that may have some reason to explain why they don't show up so much. And I think Flex might be the same kind of direct sales as opposed to through vendors.
Speaking of LCraft, you've got a special relationship with that manufacturer. Not only are they relatively close to your home, but I think you also do some field testing for them. Tell me about that.
Every ham's dream to be able to give immediate feedback to a vendor before they ship anything and get to try it out early and even get to have input before they've built their first prototype. And for whatever reason, they got in touch with me and gave me a chance early on to have sign a non-disclosure agreement, show me early prototypes and what they were thinking, take lots of notes. And they know I was active on HF, and so there's employees who work at LCraft that know me well from the contest club, the Northern California Contest Club, or NCCC. So they directed them to me, and I got to meet with them interactively. It's about an hour drive from here. And then we have private email lists where we can go back and forth with other hams and talk about features we want, or features what we they'll show us a prototype. We'll say, why don't you change this or add that? And I got to do that with the K-Pod device, the portable outboard tuning knob that's available for the K4, and I got to have a lot of feedback from that. It was based on a knob I'd used with a Kenwood radio many years ago called the Eclatech outboard tuning knob for the TS 930. It was produced by some hams in the Midwest, and I really missed that feature when I didn't have my outboard tuning knob anymore. I like to put a knob right next to the keyboard so I don't have to move my hands a lot. My hands are almost always on the keyboard while contesting. So I was really glad they added that to the K3, and it was plug and play with the K4, and it'll be plug and play with your laptop when they have the VK4 or virtual K4 software. So field testing is interesting. You get buggy releases to try out that others don't get to see, and then you report those bugs to them, and they try to fix as many as they can before it goes to beta and then field test. And then production. So it's great to be able to have that interaction. They don't always listen to me or prioritize things the way I'd like them to prioritize it, but that's their prerogative, and they have to make business decisions on where to spend their development resources, and I understand that.
So since you have an inside track to LCraft, what can you tell us about the future of remote with the K4s?
Well, it's in field test right now. It probably will soon go to beta. They really have been demoing it at the booth for years, but it's just the demo. Now it's really working. And I don't have a remote station myself, like some of my friends, like a fellow field tester, Rick Taven, N6XI. He has a remote station at a mountain cabin, and he uses he's been testing the remote software quite a bit. I have two K4s, so I can sort of test them on the LAN and try stuff side by side and make sure that works. But it's going to be, unlike Flex, there won't be a central server to rely on. You'll simply need to know the external IP address of your router and port forward one port to the K4, which gets an IP address on your LAN. And then the external users just need to know the IP address and port number to use and a password. And then they can connect right to your K4. You get the whole screen, you get beautiful audio, you get the waterfall display, and CW timing is actually pretty good, which is a major challenge for operating remote when you're keying a local PC or a local radio. Right now, it's just one K4 to another K4. At the show in Visalia, they showed for the first time a prototype of just the front panel of the K4. They call it the K4 It has no transmitter in it, but otherwise it's a kind of a full function client. And then they've also announced the intent to have what they call a V-Pod, which is like an expanded K-Pod with some more inputs on the back. So it'll be just the knob and some inputs, but no display, like the K4, and it'll cost less. So all that's coming. Eric has been saying at the shows late summer, but I've heard that a couple of years ago too. So things do change in the development world. It can be harder to implement something than you think it should be. What is that? Every project that's 90% done is really 50% done, if you're familiar with the way software works. So it's largely software, but they have hardware dependencies also. Obviously, they can make more money selling hardware than software. So that's their business model.
So Bob, I'm keeping a close eye on the K4 remote situation because, as you probably know, I'm using a K3 or K3 Mini to operate K3s at our remote station in northern Maine. And as you also probably know, getting a hold of a K3 Mini is very hard, and the remote rigs that they're required to use are also very difficult to come by.
I may have underestimated the demand for remote users. I guess as more and more people can't put up antennas where they live for one reason or another, the remote capability becomes really important. And of course, LCraft is focused 100% on getting that remote capability of the K4 out the door. As I may have mentioned before, they have the K4 to K4 communication in field test and beta right now, and they're demonstrating that at the booth. They're going to have virtual K4 software there where you could use a K-Pod or a V-Pod, and the expanded one on your laptop to communicate without a radio. And then they have the front panel, the K40, which they demonstrated for the first time at Visalia. That gives you the full display and all the connectors that you would need to connect your laptop for contesting. Obviously, it's highly dependent on the quality of your internet connection, especially the upload speed at the server site. I've measured it in field test as less than 2 megabits per second with full audio and display. So as long as you can maintain a solid 2 megabit per second upload speed or less, a little less, you probably will be in good shape in terms of getting remote to work. And even CW timing, which is the biggest challenge for remote, seems to have been pretty well solved. Even a straight key at the client end will sound like a straight key at the server end, the way they're doing things.
Well, certainly internet is the obstacle, right? And we just discovered that a couple minutes ago, and hopefully the viewers won't notice this. I'll be able to patch this together, but you and I were in the middle of a conversation 5 minutes ago. I lost the internet on this side, and the first thing we said to each other was, this is exactly the obstacle with remote ham radio. You lose that internet and you're done in the middle of a contest.
It's interesting. That is going to be a challenge that LCraft can't really solve, which is how many ISPs out there really will support over a weekend when they like to do their updates, 48 straight hours of continuous internet connection speed without flagging you as some kind of server and shutting you down or who knows what. So, even here on Comcast, which is very reliable in San Jose, they decide to reboot my router, usually on the weekends in the middle of the night, right when we're in the middle of contesting. It's down for 10 minutes, and that can be a killer in a contest, especially if it's close.
I will say that I did operate remote from a hotel room in Scottsdale, Arizona last year. And the biggest problem I had was a rotor that failed in Van Buren, Maine. But my internet connection stayed solid the entire weekend, which shocked me. I really did not think I'd have that kind of luck in a hotel, but I think it is also the luck of the draw.
You were using the hotel Wi-Fi?
I was.
Wow. That would be, in my view, the most unreliable internet you could test. So that's interesting. Well, the K4 won't need any remote rig boxes. The function is built in audio, band scope. You do need an Ethernet connection in the shack, or you can use a Ethernet to Wi-Fi adapter. As long as your K4 is seeing the internet, then you should be able to connect to it. There's going to be some complications. Some ISPs use something called CGNAT, which I don't know what it stands for. It kind of hides your real IP address, and so external sources can't get to the IP address of your station. And that's going to be a challenge for some to figure out. Right now, the K4 just supports IPv4, not IPv6 addressing. Maybe they can fix that someday, and that'll make things easier. Not sure. But you might have to set up a virtual private network, a VPN, to make it work. All of these things are going to be a lot of support calls for LCraft over the next year once they enable remote to work. I imagine the discussion on the K4groups.io is going to be mostly about remote operating for once they release it to the public and people struggle with getting things to work. Hams are good at connecting antennas together and plugging in radios, but not so good at internet stuff, router stuff, TCP/IP stuff. That's all new to many hams, especially the older generation. So we'll see how that goes.
But Bob, it's not new to you. It must be clear to the viewers by now that you have a pretty strong technical background, but what they might not know is that you're a retired IBM software engineer, and even in retirement, you started building equipment in your garage. Tell me about that. You just bored after retirement?
Well, I wasn't bored, but it's more like, necessity is the mother of invention. I had this octopus of wires behind my K3, 2 of them, so that I could share the K3's accessory port with a band decoder and an amplifier and some other equipment. And I just had been staring at this switch box and thinking, why can't I make my own device that splits it? So things we've lost, I used to go to a Tuesday afternoon luncheon near HRO in Sunnyvale, California, which both the HRO there doesn't exist and the lunch place we used to go to doesn't exist. But hams would meet kind of regularly there every Tuesday, and you'd, shoot, maybe a dozen hams, maybe less, just having lunch near the HRO. And they would say, what we really need is a breakout box for that accessory port. And I kept thinking, I've never done a hardware project. I've been doing software all my life, but I started out building Heath kits and soldering stuff together. And I'd really like to get away from the computer and build something with my hands once in a while. So came up with this box. I actually happen to have a version of it here, which this is the serial box version, which is the thing that splits serial ports. But I have one very similar, uses the same case that I call the Y box that splits the K3 accessory port. And it evolved, and there's been different versions, and it keeps me busy. And I learned a tremendous amount about what people are trying to connect together and all the problems they have. It's one of those things that you presented with a problem you can solve, you want to solve it. So I like to tell people, if you want to make an engineer happy, give them a problem they can solve. If you want to make them unhappy, give them an unsolvable problem. So that was what led to it, and allowed me to have a little income on the side and stay away from the computers and make some people happy with some solutions. So I'm enjoying doing that. It's very challenging, though, and I had to learn how to configure every possible device a ham could connect to a shack if it uses a serial port.
So are you expanding that product line? Is this a business you think will grow in the future with additional products?
Not really. I have one idea for a product that I don't think there's enough demand for, so I may never ship it. It would be sort of a lockout system or a way of interrupting one radio with another. Others have kind of come up with their own methods for doing that. I certainly have gone through, I guess, 3 versions of the serial box, or S box as I call it, and 4 versions of the Y box, just adding incremental improvements to it as things come out. For example, SPE Expert Amplifier now has a better way of talking to ICOM radios with a little additional circuitry so that they can switch bands more reliably by tracking the CIV connector. And so I added that little circuit to the version 3 of the serial box. That's the kind of thing. I don't want it to be a full-time job. I kind of want a part-time job doing it. I'm not very good at marketing. I haven't updated my website in years. It's still got the old versions on it. I do intend to update that and maybe get some new pictures up and so on as I've changed the case and made things a little better. But every version I make, I think, is a little better than the last. But I think it's pretty stable right now. And I've got just ordered one more set of parts so I can build enough for the next year or so, and we'll see what happens after that.
So, Bob, when I think about all the years you have in ham radio, and you have a lot of them, and your experience and your technical knowledge, and most importantly, how you look at a problem and you come up with a fix, it really begs this big question. What do you think the future of ham radio is? Do you think that we're generating a new crop of ham radio operators that are problem solving in the same way? Where do you think this hobby goes?
Well, it's when I was growing up in ham radio, it was the thing that young people did. If you were technically inclined, I learned how to solder in an electronics shop in junior high school, which no longer exists as far as I can tell. And I built kits there, and then I built the Heath kit, and I just enjoyed all that stuff, and that also I just enjoyed making machines work. And I guess that's what led to me being interested in computers when I got to college and making machines do even more things. But these days, young people are more into, social media or video games or trying to become influencers on YouTube or, make money before they ever graduate from college or something like that. It's kind of a different world. And I think the new hams these days are many people who are interested in radio, but now they're retiring. They've done their career. Now they want to go play with some toys, and they can afford to buy them. And so I think the new hams these days, it's always great to think that, well, we'll get a whole bunch of new young people to be hams. And obviously there's activities that are interesting to young people, talking to the space station, or fox hunts or other types of things. And there's a few young contesters out there that are bitten by the bug, and it's always great to see that. But, the most new hams these days, I think the average age of a first-time licensee, I don't know the numbers, but it's probably way higher than it was back in the 70s when I got my first license. So that means the future of ham radio is going to be different than what we might think. Obviously, more and more computerization, artificial intelligence will somehow be mixed into ham radio in terms of either signal decoding or operating your radio remotely more intelligently. I like to see hams learning the skills rather than computers learning the skills. But like, I don't believe in self-driving cars. I don't think I'd believe in self-driving ham radio stations either. I think it's great as a technical challenge to have, robotic competitions, or my ham radio robot competes with your ham radio robot. That would be fine as a separate category. Just don't want to see them mixed together. Just like in the world of chess, you've got computers that can beat the best humans now. Also in the game of Go. But you don't want to necessarily see that all the time. You don't want a computer always entering and winning Jeopardy. Having it as a demo is interesting and a great technical challenge worthy of doing. But as a regular thing, we don't need to see it.
Well, I think we'd all like to see high schoolers and college kids get involved with the hobby, but your comments are actually making me recall a conversation that I think I had with Scott Wright, K0MD. And I think his point was there are a lot of people in midlife where their kids are a little bit older, maybe heading off to college, they're in mid-career, and they might not be obviously 27 anymore, but they're late 30s, mid 40s, and they can afford to get in the hobby. Maybe we should pay a little more attention to that group and not only on the 18 and 19-year-olds. So I think you're spot on that there is an older ham getting involved, but that doesn't have to mean 65 or 70. There could be some 40 to 45-year-old hams or prospective hams out there that we just need to encourage.
There always is the potential, especially with engineering students, to get them into the hobby that way. And for me, for many hams, they were interested in the hobby first, and that led to their careers, as opposed to these days where it doesn't seem to work quite that way, at least for some people.
So, Bob, I asked you to be on the show to talk about Hawaii, and I see we're half an hour in. We haven't talked about Hawaii, and I think that's going to have to be a separate show. But before I say goodbye to you, just give our viewers a quick look at your WPXD expedition to Hawaii and who was involved and how that all came about.
Well, I was invited by longtime great contester and Contest Hall of Fame member N6TJ. Jim had me come out, invited me to come operate. It's a phone contest. I'm a CW guy, so I really didn't want to operate a phone contest, but he's very convincing. It's a beautiful spot on the North Shore of Hawaii, the old KH6XX station. It's gone through a number of ham owners over the years, now owned by Alex, KH6YY. We use the call sign of one of our local operators, NH7T. It's a good prefix for the WPX contest. In other contests, we've used KH6J. And it was a multi team of mostly sixes and a couple of locals. KH7U is a local, was there. He's main station engineer of the station, does all the maintenance. And Alex is very determined to make it a top class contest station. It has a 3-element Yagi on 80 and other big beams on 40 and all the high bands, and a pretty good location on a hill on the North Shore. Who other operators? We had AA6AA, not to be confused with N6AA, who was on the team, as well as Terry Baxter and 6CW. I'm forgetting folks here, but you can look up the operator list. Of course, in K3LR, Tim and Sandy, DL1QQ, they came out to Hawaii for the first time. It's one of the very first times that Tim has come out to operate it on the expedition in his life. And they had an interesting experience. And of course, Sandy from Germany, DL1QQ, she had a lot of fun just seeing the beaches of Hawaii and enjoying the wonderful vacation that anybody can have in Hawaii. Then you get to play some radio too. She's a very good operator and had a lot of fun on 20 meters working Europeans and speaking in German and pulling in all kinds of QSOs that we wouldn't have pulled in without her. So it was a fun experience that way. And then there was a total radio blackout that we all experienced, which is unusual but common during sunspot maximums, where you look around the room and all the band scopes are just flat. And you just, what happened? And, you wait for it to come back. That's
pretty rough in a multi when nobody has anything to do, right?
Right, but it affects the whole world at the same time. So we just, wait for it to come back and then we keep going. But it's one of those things that you can only experience live on radio. If this was simulated in some kind of network gaming scenario, I don't know if anybody would find it amusing at all. But having it happen in the real world where the sun spits something at the earth and you get to experience the effects that ordinary humans aren't going to notice at all because they're not on the radio listening to the radio waves like we are. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon to see that happen. Doesn't happen very often, but you have to recognize it.
You mentioned the antennas, but I think you also had a stack of K4s there, correct?
Yeah, I should mention that every radio position had a LCraft K4. Mostly K4s without the subreceiver because you don't really need them on the high bands. There's one radio per band, so 6 stations, and then Alex has his own separate station. And they all performed quite well. We used a variety of amplifiers with the K4. There was at least one KPA 1500 there. I was on 10 meters and sharing it with N6TV, and I was using an alpha amplifier there. So the nice thing about the K4 compared to most other radios on the market is it has a advanced compression algorithm that increases talk power without increasing distortion. It's called CESSB, Controlled Envelope Single Sideband. And LCraft managed to get that into the radio, and it makes a big difference in talk power. It limits the peaks, controlling the envelope. That's what the CE part is about. And it increases the average talk power. So you actually get to see the meter on your amplifier staying in the higher range as you're talking. And it sounds very good on the air too.
Well, Bob, I said this when we started. I'm sure there's going to be future conversations with you. You've got a wealth of knowledge that we can't fit into 35 minutes, but I really appreciate you taking time today. I appreciate your patience dealing with the internet issue. Thanks for joining me.
You're very welcome. See you next time.
I've been talking to Bob Wilson, N6TV. He'll be back on the show again in the future. Have a great day.